Oozing with a gruesome, bloody past, Scotland has long been the fascination of those interested in the supernatural, chilling accounts it seeped in. For centuries, people have professed to have been witness to some of the most disturbing spectres known to Great Britain, and are steadily reporting fresh sightings today. Dominating the picturesque city of Edinburgh sits the remarkable Edinburgh-Castle. A historic fortress, Edinburgh-Castle is located on the Castle Rock and has been occupied by human beings since before the Iron Age. Currently in the care of Historic Environment Scotland, the castle is the most visited paid tourist attraction, boasting in excess of over 2.1 million visitors in 2018, making Edinburgh a hotspot for those lured in by the rich, gory, brutal history of the castle. Mysterious, shadowy figures are often seen throughout the castle. The heart-stopping sensation of being touched by something not of this world is a phenomenon widely reported by visitors. Renowned as one of Edinburgh's most famous spirits is the ghost of the Bagpiper Boy. Secret tunnels were discovered beneath the castle hundreds of years ago. So narrow was the tunnel opening, a boy was sent down with a set of bagpipes to investigate. The bagpipes used as an indicator as to where the tunnels lead. All of a sudden, without warning, the pipe music stopped and panicked search parties were sent in to try to retrieve the boy. But alas, he was never recovered. Chillingly, since then, there have been a vast number of sightings of the Bagpiper Boy. One recent account tells of a local resident who had been taking his 2 grandchildren around the castle. This was nothing unusual. The trio often visited on the days they had the children, whilst their parents worked the holidays. The grandfather had momentarily turned his back on his 6-year-old grandson whilst he rummaged around in his backpack for his infant granddaughter's bottle. Taken aback at hearing the voices of 2 young boys engaged in conversation, he turned around, expecting to see his grandson chatting away to another child he'd met on the tour of the castle. But no. Bathed in a blue light was the vivid image of a small boy clutching a set of bagpipes proudly, talking to his grandson. The witness recalled having to double take as this wee lad was stood there, proud as punch with his pipes. As I watched in disbelief, this boy continued talking with my grandson, Nick, until he realised I was there. And then, like a light switching off, he was gone, disappeared in front of my eyes. Nick was entirely nonchalant. He hadn't realised the boy wasn't a flesh and blood being, and I hadn't the heart, or at the time the courage, to tell him. I remember grabbing his hand and we left. On the short walk home, Nick revealed the Piper Boy had been talking excitedly about his pipes and asked if he wanted to try them. The grandfather is far from alone. Eerily, similar stories flood in telling of the ghostly child. Some people haven't taken their sighting quite so in their stride as this young boy, however. One lady had been peering into her handheld mirror after a piece of dust or fluff had landed in her eye. When startled, she saw the smiling face of a young boy behind her. The lady reported jumping out of my skin at the sight of this pale little face laughing at me in the mirror. He had short, dark hair, huge brown eyes, and the most mischievous smile I'd seen in my life. That distinctive grin that anyone who's a parent will instantly recognise when their child's been caught with their hands in the biscuit tin. At first instance, I felt the compulsion to laugh. But this feeling, this horrendous, icy shudder, like a damp blanket of dread and despair, enveloped me. I was left terrified and in shock. I couldn't move my legs for about 10 minutes, and the moment I could, I ran. The lady had returned calmer the next day to report her paranormal sighting to unsurprised staff, who informed her of the ghostly boy's frequent visits. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the hysteria of witchcraft was rife and engulfed Scotland. Edinburgh Castle found itself a vital part in the imprisonments. torturing and executions of these condemned men and women accused. One such woman, Lady Janet Douglas of Glamis, was horrifically burned alive at the stake in full view of her young son, having been found guilty of being a witch and plotting the murder of King James V in 1537. There have been countless sightings of Lady Jane's forlorn soul stalking the castle and its grounds. One couple in the late 1990s reported seeing a ghostly lady crying uncontrollably in the halls. My partner and I distinctively saw a willowy figure of a middle-aged lady bawling her eyes out crying. She was in a terrible state, the most abject pain, so we naturally approached her, as anybody would, to offer comfort and perhaps some sort of aid. As we reached her, we felt a terrific sense of cold. So cold it turned us to stone on the spot. It went through to your very bones. I went to reach out to her when she turned sharply around to me with the most sincere look of hatred in her eyes, and she vanished. Right then and there, just dissolved from view in front of us. There was also the smell. Honestly, like something out of hell. The unmistakable stench of rotting, putrid meat and bonfire which surrounded her. As she disappeared, so did the repulsive malodor. Predictably, the couple didn't stick around. They left immediately after the sighting. The castle's dungeon is a hive of ghostly activity. People have been subjected to terrifying sightings and experiences, believed to be Lady Janet's servants. One can only imagine the horrors these tormented souls would have endured during their agonizing time here. The sound of a hollow knocking at night is a widely reported occurrence. It's believed to be Janet's servants vying desperately for attention in a futile bid to alert the living that they are still there, still perishing, still highly anguished and oh, so vengeful. Back in 2016, a frightened visitor reported being tapped from behind by somebody. Turning around, he was confronted by the distressing image of a short man, whom the witness describes as being the most angry, spiteful, venomous-looking man I'd ever seen. He looked directly at me, stretching his neck up as far as it would extend to look me in the eye as best he could with these horrid, poky little eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. So deviant. Muttering in a deeply scornful voice, he simply said the words, "Go to hell." It was his calm, precise, seething tone that gave me heart palpitations. I wanted to say to him that he was mistaken, that he was after someone else. I'd never met this guy, but I was welded, petrified to the spot. I'm not a timid man myself and am afraid of very little, so this was a complete curveball. I remember clearly the horrible state of his skin. Dimpled, cut and cratered, covered in these moles. Blackheads formed a sort of arch around his bulbous nose, which was scrunched up in disgust at my being there. He was stood there, surrounded by this strange pool of orangey light, no intention of moving, blocking my escape. I was agog at what I was seeing, and before I could utter any words, he raised his hand to strike me, and as he did so, he vanished into thin air. I couldn't believe it. Still can't to this day. Edinburgh Castle continues to be a thriving location for brave, supernatural fanatics hoping to catch a glimpse of a spectre. Perhaps the moral to this story is to be careful what you wish for. Very careful. Surrounded by lush, scenic greenery in the Firth of Clyde, Scotland, sits the magnificent Brodick Castle. Currently under ownership by the National Trust for Scotland, Brodick offers more than its fair share of restless spirits and demonic souls. With a history dating back to 1510, the castle has had ample opportunity to amass many lost souls seeking sanctuary, and it certainly doesn't disappoint in the case of the Grey Lady of Brodick. Believed to be the lost and unfortunate soul of a cheated, spurned lover, the Grey Lady is frequently spotted wandering around the long castle halls and is even known to approach the castle's staff whilst they are working and attempts to engage them in conversation. According to legend and folklore, the Grey Lady was in life a servant living in the Cromwellian era. Having conceived an illegitimate child as a result of a passionate but tempestuous affair, she was deserted by her lover and, shortly after, disowned by her immediate family, who were outraged and appalled at her behaviour and lack of self-control. Devastated, confused, and worst of all, entirely alone, she drowned herself in her desperation in the quay by the entrance to the castle. A recent visitor to the castle provided a most poignant, depressing account. The witness had been studying the castle, researching its deep history for a book he was writing. Whilst taking notes, he felt somebody casually walk up and stand beside him. Engrossed in his work, he didn't take much notice of the person to his left, although he was aware it was a woman and he could detect an enigmatic perfume, reminiscent of Parma violet sweets. He recalled the woman was stood unusually close to him, which he found strange as they were the only two people present in the room at the time. The lady began talking away to him, almost as if they were old friends meeting up after a year or so. Not to seem rude, he turned to see a beautiful lady, heavily pregnant, radiant and described as pure-looking. It was obvious she was keen to chat. She had that look of loneliness in her eyes. I felt a bit sorry for her in an odd way. I was transfixed by the beauty of her, to be honest. Long, chestnut brown hair in loose ringlets. She had these incredible wide green eyes and this flawless porcelain clear skin. I was a bit flattered she was talking to me, I have to admit. I don't usually attract the attention of women as lovely as she was. I soon forgot about my notes. We chatted for what must have been half an hour. She was so enthused by our conversation. As I mentioned, it was so unreal, as here was this exceptional, no, perfect woman talking to me and hanging on my every word. She spoke softly, eloquently, and was so articulate. I had the feeling she hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, as she was so interested in everything. We spoke of the castle, to which she knew a tremendous amount. She spoke of the land surrounding the castle, its history, even the rumoured ghosts and ghouls believed to be present. I asked if this was her first baby, and she said proudly yes it was, that she hoped for a girl, which she wanted to name Mary. I distinctly recall telling her my grandmother was called Mary and remarking what a lovely, traditional name it is. She seemed really happy to the point of ecstatic, and it was, I have to say, infectious. She was such an optimistic woman, looking forward to the future and what it promised for her and her little one. Bursting with happiness, she went on to tell me of the tiny clothing she had been knitting for her child. She asked me if I had children, to which I said no. I was, at that time, unmarried. After a time, she said her goodbyes and walked off with a smile on her face and a really happy disposition. I smiled to myself and started writing my notes once more. Around a minute later, I heard a sigh in the doorway. I turned to see the tour guide, looking slightly fed up. He explained that the castle should have closed some 15 minutes ago, and it was quite apparent that they were wanting to go home. Embarrassed, I collected my things and, nearly forgetting, I asked them not to lock up until the pregnant lady who had just been here had left as well. I was completely perplexed when the tour guide questioned who I meant. The gorgeous, heavily pregnant woman who would have just passed you in the corridor. You couldn't miss her with a bump that size. The tour guide shook his head and revealed that there was no lady. What I'd just encountered was the Grey Lady of Brodick. I was speechless and in disbelief, actually. I'd always dismissed the idea of ghosts as a made-up fancy by the easily entertained, but here I was, unable to deny the ghostly woman I had both seen and engaged in conversation with. Perhaps a more macabre phantom is the ghost of a man believed to inhabit the castle's library. Reported as being an eerie-looking soul, dressed in a vibrant green and wearing an ill-fitting wig, he can often be perceived as rather menacing, with an unnerving smile which creates unease in all who claim to see him. Little is known about who this eccentric soul was in life, considering many witnesses report a sensation of being unwelcome. One member of staff said the flamboyant spectre even hissed at him as he passed. It's a pretty safe bet to assume the ghoul in the library didn't enjoy his life very much. It's a much debated subject, what makes a soul keep coming back and reveal itself to the living. So many questions. Who are they? Or were they? What do they want? Why won't they cross over to the other side? Can they really see us, or are they merely looking over in our general direction? So much still unknown to us, and we still find ourselves, hundreds of years later, still no wiser, no clearer as to why and how these apparitions came to be. It is a popular belief that these tormented souls are damned, accursed, forced to endure all eternity wandering around the same old places they knew in life, but this time without any comfort, any rest. Others have concluded that worlds somehow overlap, dimensions intermingle, meaning the sighting of somebody who lived centuries ago is entirely plausible. The one thing paranormal enthusiasts seem to agree on is that these manifestations cannot achieve solace or godly mercy. They are trapped in an icy, still limbo of anguish and resentment, where they are destined to remain, doomed forever to observe a world they can no longer touch or be a part of. Nestled within the captivatingly alluring heart of Aberdeenshire lies the exquisite and imposing Castle. An excellent example of baronial Scottish architecture, Fyvie certainly plays host to a number of ghostly inhabitants. Probably the most famous of Fyvie's ghosts is the vengeful spirit of the Green Lady, thought to be the restless soul of Dame Lilias Drummond, the betrayed, bereft wife of Sir Alexander Seton, a former owner of Fyvie. Despite his and Lilias's 5 daughters, Lord Seton yearned for a son, and it was the drive and obsession for this desire that led to his embarking on a lurid affair with Lilias's own younger, achingly beautiful cousin, Griselle Leslie. Naturally, on discovering her husband's deceit, Lilias was furious. The archetypal woman possessed, she clawed and she pleaded, begged Seton to give up Griselle, but he would not. A domineering, cruel personality, Lord Seton was well used to getting what he wanted in life, and shortly after, it was announced that Dame Lilias was gravely ill. In truth, Dame Lilias had been walled up within the castle, with an escape impossible. Lilias perished in the most excruciating agony, starving to death, frantically scratching at the walls that entombed her. Lilias could be heard by castle servants screeching a blood-curdling pitch throughout the castle, a wailing that would invoke fear in even the stoniest of hearts. Anybody who tried to release Dame Lilias was punished with a grisly death by being thrown from the highest window in the castle. It is recorded that on the fateful night Lord Seton married his striking young bride, Griselle, they were suddenly awoken by the wails and groans of a woman in immense distress. The young bride, Griselle, was terrified and inconsolable on hearing the commotion. Lord Seton tried his best to reassure her by explaining the noise away as foxes or the wind. The following morning, as Griselle pulled the heavy bedroom curtains, she was stunned to discover there, etched deep in the stone, was the name D. Lilias Drummond. Even in death, it appears Lilias refused to release her husband to this treacherous woman, and the fact she was Lilias' cousin made the betrayal far deeper. It burned a hole in Lilias's heart, and her bitterness, to this day, will not perish, despite the enormous passing of time. Lord Seton and Griselle were far from alone in their dealings with Lilias' resilient soul. Numerous visitors to the castle have reported an intense, overpowering smell of roses or rose petals. Dame Lilias's favoured perfume, which had emanated from an entirely non-existent source. One eyewitness claimed to have stepped aside to let a woman in the most exquisitely detailed green bejewelled dress pass him in the doorway. At first, he thought nothing of this, a common occurrence after all, assuming the woman was an actress taking part in an entertainment evening at the castle, a murder mystery or some such. Only as she passed him, before his very eyes, she faded away completely out of sight. The eyewitness was adamant the woman had not been aware of him. It was though she was passing through obliviously. Other witnesses of the Green Lady have been terrorized into a stupor on seeing Lilias. One woman was so horrified she almost fainted with sheer fright. On touring the castle one summer, the elderly lady had stopped to look into a large, resplendent mirror hanging on the wall, when suddenly, out of nowhere, the pained, gaunt image of an emaciated woman, with stern expression and dressed in bottle green, glared at her, flashing back and forth several times before completely disappearing. In her torment, the poor elderly woman had been soothed by knowing castle staff, who reassured her that she was not going mad. It's hardly surprising the castle oozes such a macabre, sombre aura, especially when you consider the unsavoury and vile way Lilias was allegedly treated and the shameless way in which she departed this life. Lilias was a mere 29 years of age at the time of her death, so young, so much to live for, robbed of her existence in the most savage and heinous way. Another widely seen apparition is that of the Grey Lady of Fyvie, believed to be the soul of Lady Meldrum, another past resident of the castle. Lady Meldrum had stressed to those surviving her that she fully intended to have her body buried within the walls of a secret room in Meldrum Tower, to which she was exceptionally fond. Lady Meldrum's explicit wishes were consequently ignored, and instead she was buried in the cemetery. Having been denied her wish, sightings of the tortured, furious vision of Lady Meldrum continue to flood in. Visitors have reported seeing a lost and lonely woman aimlessly wandering about the castle's spectacular grounds, usually by the huge tree by the castle's entrance, as though sorrowfully looking for something or someone. A recent report details a visitor being kicked in the shin by an enraged woman who came charging at him out of nowhere as she toured the grounds. When you pause to consider the many anguished souls that have been subjected to the most unspeakable acts of betrayal and violence at the majestic Fyvie Castle, it stands to reason that the old building is alive with the buzz of unrest and unfinished, unavenged